I'm very happy to be with you today. I came from Kansas City for this event.
Wow.
So, and I know you all came from different spots. This is, I think we should think of this as a successful battle in a long war that we're going to have to fight. There's two ways to think about fighting racism. One is that you're fighting a leftover phenomenon left over from the Jim Crow era that still hangs on. That's one thing, and it's true. But it's also true that we have a battle to come, and it's going to be coming over the next 30 years as the demographics of this country change. And in that regard, I'd like to speak more to the young people here, because you are the ones who are going to be fighting that fight in 2042 when white people become a minority, and groups like American Renaissance will be taking their battle to a next level and a next level. They hope to dismember this country. They hope to create a whites-only republic. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But what we have to do is prepare now to fight now, because we know the fight is going to continue on for a while. I'm going to give you the skinny on the American Renaissance as best I can in a short period of time. I'm going to try and explain to you the role that American Renaissance plays in the white nationalist movement as a whole. I'm going to talk about the relationship of the white nationalist movement to racist politics as a whole, and then where that fits in our conversation. So I will move through this fairly fast. American Renaissance was founded as a newsletter in 1990 by a guy named Jared Taylor. He's not a guy with low self-esteem. He went to Yale University as an undergraduate and one of the lycées in Paris as a graduate student. He was, before he started working on his newsletter, American Renaissance, he was the West Coast editor of PC Magazine. He's a learned fellow. And the people that participate in the American Renaissance conferences, for the most part, are PhDs, academics, doctors, and attorneys. These are people who are not picking on folks because they need to pick on somebody. These are people who are defending something, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit. He started out in 1990. Mostly the newsletter was written from the point of view, falsely I might add, of a disappointed liberal. I used to be a liberal, and we gave these black folks so many this and that, and still they're doing so terrible, and there is all this crime and blah, and you know that kind of rap, you've heard it before 1,000 times. Well, that's the point of view, and he in fact had published a book called Paved with Good Intentions that laid out that whole crime rap. And that was the basis from which he sprung. And he did the Paved with Good Intentions, got good reviews from National Review and some of the mainstream conservative world. That's where he came from. In 1994, they took a leap forward, and they organized their first conference in Atlanta. And it's of some significance what happened in 1994. Those of you who might remember, that was the year the bell curve was published. And so what you had was, in the minds of the people around Jared Taylor and the American Renaissance, you had the moment at which they could say, our views on the genetic deterministic view of race, and that's what they have been legitimized by this bell curve book. And so they held their first conference at one of the airport hotels in Atlanta. They had a whole bunch of regular old Klansmen and neo-Nazis there. But the ideology of American Renaissance, and I want to be clear on this for those of us who are going to talk about it in the future, is not a neo-Nazi ideology. They do not have an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory at the core of their set of ideas. These folks are race, race, and race. They have Nazis in their midst, but that's not their core ideology, and we can talk about that some more. And they had a bunch of them. David Duke came to this conference, and they wouldn't let him in. They spent the whole time trying to pick up stewardesses in the bar, was sitting outside the conference. That's a little bit about their origins. Over the years, they've had conferences about every 2 years until Daryl and them started screwing with them, they've given them a hard time, and so their conferences are less regular than they used to be, but they used to be every 2 years like clockwork. And I think it's important to understand that the conference had a different role than the newsletter. The newsletter had about 6,000 subscribers. The conferences were a smaller group of about 250 people. And the newsletter was written in a learned, academic, scholarly style. It was written calling on research and so forth. But the conference itself was more of a place where they could think about where they were going in the future. And that's what the significance of the conference was for them. And it became a place over time. By the end of 2000, they were very much, the conference and the American Renaissance and the board of directors and the advisory board of the Council of Conservative Citizens were very much interlocked. And so to a certain degree, not a complete degree, but to a certain degree, they became the think tank for the much larger Council of Conservative Citizens. The Council of Conservative Citizens, for those of you who don't remember the Trent Lott affairs and then the recent business with the governor of Mississippi, Haley Barbour, they are the lineal descendants of the old white citizens councils. They're strong, a mass organization. They have about 15,000 people. And at one time they had about 24 members of the Mississippi State, one time in the 1990s, not the 1950s. So one time in the 1990s they had about 24 state representatives in the Mississippi State Legislature and some state senators. They had some people in South Carolina Republican Party. They had, the Council of Conservative Citizens was connected. Trent Lott, who was the head of the Senate at the time, his uncle Arnie, who was a state legislature, was a bigwig in the council, and he considered Trent, his favorite nephew, an honorary member of the council. So I think I'm on schedule. So that became what the American Renaissance represented. It was a place, in their own words, where they could put forward their ideas. And the ideas, you'll forgive me, I'm going to go to, there's a chapter where I describe the American Renaissance, and here they say that this is one of their speakers, Sam Francis, who was a staffer for Senator John East in North Carolina. A lot of these people came out of the John East staff, actually. The civilization that we as whites created in Europe and America could not have been developed apart from the genetic endowments of the creative people. So there's a couple lies in that. I don't have to, explain it too much, but of course this isn't a white civilization, never was. And genes didn't have too much to do with it. I think guns and, given the native population, the disease and slave ships had more to do with it than the genetic endowment. But that's the core of their view. The other piece of the core of their view, so they believe that they created this place, it should be theirs. The other part of it is they believe that they are being dispossessed. In other words, we used to own and run this place, and now it's not ours. Now, there's no, maybe they have most of it, so on and so forth. They feel like they've lost it. And to the extent that they're thinking of the future, and I mentioned this briefly at the park, to the extent that they're thinking about the future, they are looking very tight at, because they believe that demography and biology is destiny, they're looking very close to the period at which white people will become a minority among other among other minorities in this country. That's the point at which the you-know-what will hit the fan for these folks. So now I'm going to talk to you about the who, the you-know-what, and the movement. I think I've got you with who the American Renaissance is. Yes. If you don't get it, shake your head no. So I can go on. Yeah. So you're clued in. These are people who are not dumb. They're educated PhDs who think that race determines everything. They think that genes is race, not socially constructed. They think genetics is race. And they think that white people built this place and therefore white people should have this place. And in their view, there's no room for an integrated multiracial society. All right. Now let's talk about their role in the white nationalist world. The white nationalist world is, to a certain degree, a movement that grew out of the old line white supremacy movement. There was a time, and I described this briefly in the introduction of this book, that the views of American Renaissance would have been the views of the commanding heights of this society. In other words, if you went to Yale or Princeton or Harvard in 1910, you would have heard all this genetic determinism being taught at the university as if it was the real deal. But a change happened. And we, and those of us who were activists and so forth, we helped create that change. And so it didn't just happen, it didn't fall from the sky. We pushed that change forward. And to a certain extent, and things changed. And so the white supremacist movement that was busy in the 1920s proclaiming how they were ruling the world stepped back in the 1960s and tried to defend the status quo. That was what the Klan was. The Klan was violent and to a certain extent revolutionary in the 1960s, but the program of the Klan and the citizens' councils and all those folks in the 1950s and 1960s was to defend the status quo. That is not true in the white nationalist movement. These are not folks trying to defend the status quo. It's not about money for them. It's not about money for them. It's money for some other folks. But these people are against the money crowd. The white nationalists see themselves as determined to overthrow the multiracial order that they see around them. Now, if that's a cockeyed point of view, so I'm not telling you that they have the real skinning. I'm telling you that is their point of view. They think that they have to overturn it. So when the militias get going in the mid-90s, they are every bit as violent and aimed at overturning the government as anybody else, right? If the white power skinheads said, they see themselves as wanting to overturn the status quo. Now, what role does American Renaissance, which is not exactly a bunch of gun-toting revolutionaries, play in this? Well, they are, to a certain extent, the think tank, the carriers of ideas for this movement. And when they emerged in 1994, they were the only ones on this certain political space. And what they described their political space in the words of Sam Francis, who was a Washington John East aide, who became a Heritage Foundation character, who worked for the Washington Times and then moved further and further out to the lunatic asylum. In the words of Sam Francis, we have to create a movement distinct from paramilitary movements and conspiracy mongering. They wanted to create a movement in the language of the old scientific racism. And they wanted to talk in a way that was sane and connected to white people. And I quote one of the regular speakers at the American Renaissance at the end of the book, Sam Dixon, who's an attorney from Marietta, Georgia. And Sam says, he says, you know, things look pretty bleak for us right now. Because, you know, we have all this going on in 2 minutes. Things are looking pretty bleak for us right now. But white people will spend $300,000 to buy a $75,000 house just so they can live with other white people. Now, there's some truth to that, isn't there? And that's the basis on which this white nationalist movement is pitched into the future. So I think I have explained some of it to you. It's obviously a bigger topic. I do want to say I've got a flyer in the back about our report on the Tea Party movement, which the NACP released last fall. I would urge you to pick this up and take a look at this. There are in North Carolina, and I didn't do a South Carolina count, so forgive me. In North Carolina, there are 60-some chapters of the Tea Party Patriots, and there's 9 chapters of Tea Party Nation. These are groups that the other people are not talking about. They're talking about Freedom Works and the Dick Armey Tea Parties. No Dick Armey Freedom Works chapters in North Carolina. 60 chapters of the Tea Party Patriots. Bunches of those want to get rid of the 14th Amendment and the 17th Amendment. Pick this up. This is something you want to pay attention to.